I like that little noise at the beginning there. Anyway, this is Toilet Gut Series Part 2, replacing a fill valve, 2-inch flapper, and supply line for a toilet. Now, Part 1 covers replacing the angle stop valve, and if you haven't seen that one yet, then what are you even doing with your life? No, I'm joking. But you might want to go watch that first if your angle stop doesn't work. But if you're not worried about your angle stop, then let's get right into the toilet. So you can see this toilet is running. When we look in the tank here, you can see that the flapper chain, if you even call it a chain, is not even connected to the handle. And not only is it not connected to the handle, but it's wedged underneath the flapper, keeping it from sealing properly. And that's why the toilet has been running. Now that I fixed the issue with the flapper, you can see that the toilet is now filling up normally. So I just want to show you real quick, the normal water level is just below that white tube there. That white tube is called the overflow tube. As you can see here, the water level is getting pretty dang close to the top of it, but it's not overflowing yet. But ideally you want it a little lower than the way it is there. That white tube in the center of the tank is called an overflow tube because the purpose is to keep the toilet from overflowing and onto the floor if the water doesn't turn off. Instead, it'll go in that tube in the center. Now, to work on the toilet, the first thing you have to do is turn off the water. This angle stop doesn't work, but we're just going to pretend that it does. If you have an angle stop that doesn't work, then you should watch part 1 of this series where we show us replacing this actual angle stop. But for all intents and purposes, let's pretend that it went ahead and turned off and move on to the next step. Once the water is shut off to the toilet, you're going to go ahead and remove the flapper and drain all of the water from the tank. Once you remove the flapper, it's usually a good idea to clean the seat where the flapper sits in there with your fingers or a cloth or something. For the next step, you want to go ahead and remove the supply line from the fill valve underneath the toilet as we're doing, and just drain any residual water. Then remove the supply line from the angle stop. You don't have to remove the old fill valve yet if you don't want to, but I do recommend adjusting the new fill valve before you get ready to put it in. As you can see, you can move up that little ring there and move the top part of the fill valve up and down, and then use that ring to lock it back in place. It's important to note that there are little in-betweens where the ring won't go over, and you may need to move up or down by like 1/8 of an inch or so. But try to set the new fill valve roughly to the same height as the old one. If you feel like trying to drain the tank completely with like a shop vac or a towel or something, you could remove the old fill valve and then just hold them up to each other to, get an idea of the height and then adjust it that way. But it's just a good idea to adjust it like this before you actually put it in the toilet. It can be adjusted once it's in the toilet, but it's just easier to do it out of the toilet like this. And again, you can see sometimes you might have to go up or down just a little to get the little ring to lock in place. But once you have it adjusted, go ahead and remove the nut holding the old fill valve in place. Now, we usually do this with a little bit of water in the tank still, just for the sake of saving time and whatnot. It's a good idea just to set up a towel down on the floor, and then basically we set up the new fill valve there to the right, and then now we're just going to undo the nut for the old fill valve, and we're going to pull the old fill valve out really quick. We're going to use our hand to block the hole there so no water gets out, and then pop in the new fill valve here while moving our hand out of the way. Now, a little water will drip out, that's why we have a towel down there, but just make sure to dry it up right away. Now, be careful trying it like this because we do this a lot and we just know how to do it. If you run into a snag or something, you could end up spilling a lot of water everywhere. So if you like, you can use a shop vac or a towel to just remove all the water from the tank and then not even have to worry about it. Tighten the nut for the fill valve below the tank by hand, and then you can go ahead and connect the black refill tube onto the overflow tube in the center of the tank as you saw us just do. And I know I said I didn't have footage of us cleaning the seat where the flapper sits, but apparently we do, because there we are cleaning it with our fingers. It's good to clean that because flapper residue can stick to it and affect the new flapper from sealing right. For the fill valve nut here, just make sure you dry it really well, tighten it by hand, and then if you want, you can snug it with pliers a little bit, but some people can tighten it just by hand enough to seal. Then you want to go ahead and tighten the supply tube to the fill valve here first. Go ahead and snug it by hand. And again, you might be able to get it tight enough by hand, but if you want to put pliers on it just to snug it a little quarter turn or so, you can do that too. I recommend connecting it to the fill valve before the angle stop, just because it's easier to avoid cross-threading it if you do it that way. Connect the 3/8 end of the supply line to the angle stop and snug it by hand, and then use a pair of pliers or one end of the one-stop wrench to tighten it. When putting in a 2-inch flapper like this, I like to use these red Korky Ultra flappers, and I swear it's just a coincidence that they're called Ultra. But those are the flappers I prefer, and just a reminder, I'm going to put links to the fill valve, the flapper, the supply line, the tools, all this stuff in the description, as well as tagged directly to the video. So you're going to have options like Home Depot, Amazon, Lowe's, whatever, just to make it easier for you. But you want to connect the two sides of the flapper to the two posts on the flush valve there where it sits, as we're going to kind of show here in a second. It's kind of a little hard to show you, but you put the one side onto the one post, and then you push the other side of the rubber flapper onto the other post. Then you're going to take the chain, and you want to connect it to the lever in a way where the chain is as tight as possible, but has a little bit of slack in it when the lever is in a still position. That's kind of the best way I can explain it. You want it as tight as possible, but with a little bit of slack. That way, if you just kind of barely press on the lever, it'll get taut or tight. That's the perfect setting for a flapper to make it flush, as the best as possible. See, as you can see, it has just enough slack in it, so it's just barely not tight. You don't want to make it too tight, because then it might leave the flapper sitting partially open, and then it's going to run water and cost you a lot of money. So if you got to err on either side, I would err on the chain being too loose as opposed to being too tight, just to be safe. But once the flapper is in place and it's connected properly to the lever, you can go ahead and turn the water back onto the toilet, as we are doing now. Once the toilet water is filling up in the tank, you want to let it fill all the way up and just make adjustments as needed. You want to ensure that the water level is just barely kind of below the overflow tube. Usually 1/8 to 1/4 inch is sufficient. Now you can adjust the fill valve in two different ways. You can adjust it as we showed you earlier, or you can adjust it like we did just a moment ago by turning the little knob that's there on top of the fill valve. If you look kind of closely, you just see that we just spun it. You can do it by hand, but you also can usually use a Phillips screwdriver to make that adjustment on the fill valve. But try flushing it a few times just to make sure the flapper lifts up all the way, make sure it flushes completely. If you have to make any adjustments, go ahead and do them. Make sure that the water level fills up to this point here. And once you get to this point, I would say just, test it 2 or 3 times, and then you're pretty much good to go. You've now replaced the fill valve, the 2-inch flapper, and the supply line for a toilet. But I really appreciate you watching. Please like and subscribe. And we're going to be doing a lot more tutorials here in the future. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, I would love to hear them in the comments. Also, you can follow us on X, Instagram, Facebook, everything.